contentious and might end up being burned at the stake by some of you in the room, but I'm going to call bullshit on most of the blockchain implementations that we see today. Complete and utter bullshit. Who's with me? I mean, the hype and the hysteria surrounding blockchain, I'm not stupid. I can see the valuable applications of blockchain. But here's one that I take a little bit of exception to. Are you familiar with Chanticleer Holdings? They own a couple of burger joints, a couple of Hooters, things like that. Their CEO recently made a press announcement about their blockchain-based customer rewards program. And I'm going to quote, and I'm going to read it, right? Use your merit mined by eating at Little Burger to get a buffalo chicken wing sandwich at American Burger, or trade them with your vegan friend so he can get a veggie burger at Burger. And that's just the beginning. There's some class A marketing bollocks right there. Okay, that is, so mining through eating chicken wings. What's he got to connect it up to a Bitcoin miner or something? What the hell? That is not a valid application of blockchain. I'm sorry. So we're hoping that we've got a couple of examples of a real, valid application of blockchain with our panelists that have survived and managed to get in here despite the weather and flight cancellations. So with no further ado, the first person that I'm going to put up here is Scott Kessler of Allo3 Energy. And they've made a bit of fame with the Brooklyn microgrid, which you might be familiar with. And I'm going to introduce him in terms of his favorite pair of shoes. Okay? Bear with me here. So he likes his brand new Allbirds because they are comfortable, not too flashy, and always a crowd pleaser. Please let's have Scott up there.
Thank you. So I am Scott Kessler, the Director of Business Development for Allo3 Energy. Not that good-looking man over there, but the one right here. And I'm coming from Allo3 Energy, which is a startup company out of Brooklyn, New York. And we are really an energy company that happens to think blockchain is the right technology for what we're trying to do. But we really all come from the energy space, who we happen to stumble across blockchain almost. The energy sector is really going through a huge change right now. It's becoming much more distributed. As we get solar panels, as we get Nest thermostats, the ability of a customer and how they participate in the electric grid is changing rapidly. Whether that is just you are producing more energy than you can consume and you're injecting back onto the grid, whether you are using your IoT devices in some smart way to ensure that you only want to consume energy at night when it's cheapest. The relationship between the customer and the utility is changing dramatically. At the same time, in New York, we experience blackouts through things like Hurricane Sandy, and so we're seeing the need for things called microgrids, these sort of small mini grids which provide more resiliency than the broader grid. And so we think of all this and say, well, there has to be some sort of way to coordinate all these devices, to take what is some small amount of value from just the incremental change in your home going from 68 degrees to 70 degrees, translate that back to other users who might be willing to purchase that, and facilitate a marketplace that everyone can have trust in. And we really see this as a move towards utility as a platform, where you have all these grid edge participants, whether that's a small residential homeowner, whether that's a large commercial business, whether that's a natural gas plant, and allowing them to transact with one another equally. So this idea of a platform really is what led us to the idea of blockchain. The fact that we have all these participants, small amounts of value, large amounts of value. We need a marketplace that is secure. We need a marketplace that is efficient. And what we decided to do was take this from, PowerPoints and white papers and really translate it into real-world deployments. So what we've really been doing as a company is saying, what happens when you go to an end customer and say, do you want to buy energy from your neighbor's solar panel? How much are you willing to pay for that? And really starting to show utilities and large energy retailers what's the difference that comes when you start doing this. So we started that with the Brooklyn microgrid that Andrew mentioned before. We have since launched projects in Germany and Australia as well. And we recently received investment from Siemens, one of the largest energy players in the world. If you think about what Siemens does, they go out and they install transformers, they install substations. If you take data from the core grid assets and actually bring that into the relationship with what you're using in your home, then all of a sudden we can say, what's the cost, not just for you to buy energy from your neighbor and assume that we all pay the same amount to use the grid, but we can actually say, your neighbor's on the same block as you, you're only using a few strands of copper, that should be pretty cheap. If you want to transact with that nuke or that coal plant that's located far away, that's more expensive. So we start putting location, time, environmental component, all of these things onto the blockchain, and then we can run the grid based on economic impact. So thanks for having me today. I think I'll take a pause there and looking forward to talking.
So, Scott, just before I let you off the hook, the irony of an energy company using a technology which has made media with consumption of energy is not lost on me. Yep. What's your response to that kind of a thing where, you know, you're an energy company, but you're using something that's really energy intensive, potentially? What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, we've developed our own private permission ledger just to get away from that. Very early on, we realized that Ethereum, blockchain, you know, the energy consumption, we all come from the energy efficiency and renewable space. We're horrified by the impacts of it. So there has to be a better way to run this. We can't have a global energy crisis just because of energy, and we can't consume more energy than we're actually managing on the network just to have that software data layer.
And something else that I had a look at the video on your guys' website around the Brooklyn microgrid, and something that really does excite me about blockchain is that it's stimulating conversation. Whether or not it's the right conversation is something else, but there's lots of conversations that are taking place simply because somebody says blockchain. And you guys have stimulated a lot of conversations, including with kids, that you've brought in around the neighborhoods. Can you talk to us about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations we want to be having is around clean energy, around participating in some community impact. Just because it has blockchain doesn't necessarily mean it has value. So we often don't tell people, participants in our projects, about the blockchain component unless they're very tax savvy. You know, you can start a conversation with anyone about solar panels these days. That's a much easier starting point than, hey, do you know anything about Bitcoin?
Fantastic. So we're going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to just get a brief intro from everybody and then we'll start opening up with some difficult questions. So I'm going to introduce Tabitha Crichton from IQ Metrics. And again, following on the shoe theme here, Tabitha is Canadian, just like her favorite leather boots, which have got a 5-inch clog heel. For the ladies in the room, you understand the logistics of that one. But like her boots, she is stable, but at the same time very creative and innovative. And more importantly, there aren't very many like her around. Tabitha, can you come and please talk to us about what you are doing that is blockchain related in IQ Metrics?
Sure. So IQ Metrics itself is a retail systems management company. So we have point of sale systems, omni-channel technologies, and where we fit in is the payment side of IQ Metrics. So within IQ Metrics, we run an entirely separate payments organization that currently has about 20,000 different merchants for whom we manage the entire payment ecosystem. So we manage their internet gateway, we manage their payment processing, we even manage the terminals and the software and the apps that would run on those terminals. And so as we see what's going on within the ecosystem today within payments, we're doing a couple of different experiments that are really looking at two very different edge cases that we think could have some really interesting blockchain implications. So the first one has to do with the underbanked and with the merchants themselves. And where we see some real opportunity for the blockchain is the ability to be able to create a more decentralized, peer-based way of transacting with economics between parties. And I say economics instead of currencies because some of the things that we're experimenting with are what we think of as latent money, like your gift cards that you're forgetting about that are sitting around, like your loyalty, 50 million different loyalty programs and cards that you can only use in one place. And so one of the things that we're looking at with the blockchain right now is taking all of those different and disparate forms of economic transaction and moving them into a blockchain environment where we can transact in a more fluid and transparent way. So it takes a little bit of a combination of what you would think of as an exchange, but it really thinks about it more in terms of if I'm in a store as a consumer, I'm able to use whatever is available to me on the spot. And more importantly, maybe I can trade what I'm already collecting with somebody else who wants those loyalty points. So I don't want to have you guys think that we're creating a token or a cryptocurrency of ourselves. What we're really interested in is taking the concept of a blockchain and moving all of those transactions into a more distributed way. Where this also comes in has to do with efficiency and cost of transaction. So if you're a retail merchant today, the cost of actually doing a transaction runs as high as maybe 3 or 4%. Every single dollar that your consumer is spending, that's what you're being charged by the payment processing companies. And that gets really, really prohibitive when margins in the retail industry are shrinking as dramatically as they are. So when you think about, well, do you really need a bank? Do you really need a payment processor? When essentially what's happening is that when I get paid, I have digital money. So does it really make sense for my paycheck to be deposited into a bank and then go across a network in order to come back to the merchant? It goes into the merchant's bank. The number of actual dollars that start to get charged in a single transaction, take that 4% and you can add as much as 2 or 3% more. So if we can move the merchant and the consumer closer together by using a blockchain, we really start to create some really interesting ideas around liquidity. This becomes really, really important for the underbanked. 40 million Americans who can't afford bank accounts, and probably another 70 million who the banks wish weren't their customers because they can't make any money. So if we can take those people who are working really hard and give them more money back in their pockets by allowing them to transact directly with a merchant, we see some really interesting opportunities. So that's one area that the payments team is experimenting in right now. The other area is the completely opposite end of the economic ecosystem, and that's everybody that's investing in cryptocurrency today. I'm sure every single person here that participates at all in crypto or blockchain has had the conversation, is it really a currency and is there really any utility other than in the speculative investment quality? Well, so we're going to test that thesis as well by taking the experience that we have as a payments company and actually looking at how we would allow people to take all those cryptocurrency investments and spend them in a normal economic transaction. So I want to buy, I want to get some healthcare. I'm going to pay with Ether. I want to go buy a Tesla. I'm going to pay with Bitcoin. Maybe one day where it becomes more feasible, when there's a larger percentage of the population that potentially is using these different currencies and tokens, you'd see it even in somewhere like a 7-Eleven. Although I think that's many, many years away since the average consumer still doesn't know what cryptocurrency actually is. So those are the kinds of things that we're experimenting with. On the cryptocurrency side, Andrew asked me to mention, his question to me was, well, what do you do about the fluctuating value of currency? I mean, again, anybody that participates knows that it can wildly go back and forth in an instant. So if I'm a merchant and I'm a consumer and I actually want to pay with something that's listed in US dollars or fiat of some kind, how do I actually know that by the time I've cleared that transaction as a merchant, I haven't lost money, or as a consumer, that I haven't actually spent more than I needed to? And so there, we're looking at working with some of the futures that are coming out, maybe into the NASDAQ in the first quarter of next year, as a way to stabilize the actual value of the economic transaction at the time that it takes place. So I think what I'd like to really emphasize here is that as a payments company, we see every kind of transaction that goes out into the marketplace today. And so where we see real opportunity with the blockchain generally is in doing these kind of niche experiments while the industry is so young, to really understand how do people want to participate and how do merchants and payment infrastructures really begin to benefit. We don't think we necessarily have all of the answers, but we do think now is the time for us to be experimenting with all of them.
Fantastic, thank you. So Michael needs no introduction because you've had him in front of you all day long, and Michael has kindly offered to stand in for Jalek at the moment. And I wanted to bring up one specific area that we have been talking about, Jalek and I, and that's the potential to use blockchain for social good. Michael, what can you tell us about that? What's the opportunities?
I'm surprised about my shoes because I'm actually here filling in psychedelic shoes, which I presume wouldn't fit me very well. But my shoes are probably nowhere near as important as hers. But in terms of this really core question, for me, it was the one thing that drew me into Bitcoin and blockchain technology in the first place. I'd spent a lot of my time in the developing world and became very interested in the idea of financial inclusion. There's we mentioned 40 million Americans who are underbanked. There's 2 billion people around the world who don't have access to a bank account of any type, which means that you can't interact and transact with anybody other than with cash. So that really excludes your business opportunities, your transactional capacity, if you can't interact over digital and banking style forms of transactions. So Bitcoin was an extremely valuable way to think about how we get around that. Now, transaction fees in Bitcoin right now are at such a point where it's becoming a little difficult to think about on-chain transactions being able to sort of stand in for remittances. But there's lots of really interesting innovation going on around what we call second layer work, like the Lightning Network, which could really speed up and greatly increase the amount of transactions over the Bitcoin network, and therefore potentially turn it into that. I don't know that necessarily Bitcoin is the answer, but there's so much innovation going on around this space that I think we really want to be able to focus on these people because they represent a massive opportunity to really expand the productive capacity of the world. 2 billion people being, introduced to the digital economy could have a profound impact. And so I think it's very important we focus on the capacity to bypass and just basically create a much more efficient system for people to transfer money. And I'll pick up, Andrew, on your opening remarks there, because when we talk about this, this bullshit idea of the blockchain solution to a problem that doesn't fit, I do think that sometimes the banking community really misses the point. If you talk about the unbanked, the word is the banked, right? So the idea is we're going to have to get them bank accounts. And so the focus is there in terms of blockchain technology are things about how do we do KYC on the blockchain, know your customer, and anti-money laundering, and all this stuff that, to be honest, is in fact part of the problem. It's not to say that we shouldn't concern ourselves with the validity and veracity of the kinds of transactions and whether or not the financial system is being used for nefarious processes. But the whole point about Bitcoin was to be digital cash. That's actually the line, the line that, or peer-to-peer cash is the line that Satoshi Nakamoto used. And cash is an anonymous vehicle, right? And so to create something that enables anonymity is in fact one of the core functions of Bitcoin. We can debate about whether or not we think that should be the way that we go or not, but I think it's important to remember this fact. As much as there are people's concerns about anonymity, and in fact, some of the concerns are that Bitcoin, in fact, isn't anonymous enough. But that ideal is actually critical to the notion of inclusion, because countless people haven't got the facilities to prove who they are to be able to enter into the system in the first place. So, we need to know what we're talking about, what we're thinking about when we are trying to resolve these core problems. But if I put that aside, I mean, the opportunities in the social good space are huge. I'm very interested in distributed energy, but I'm very interested in the microgrid idea and how we could create much more efficient peer-to-peer trading systems in really remote communities who don't have access to centralized power. How this could be a self-sufficiency empowerment model for them to build an economic platform of development based on an off-grid community microgrid. I'm really interested in property titles and the problems that Hernando de Soto, the great Peruvian economist, has highlighted over the years, where there are just hundreds of millions of people around the world who own their assets, own their homes, own their businesses, own all sorts of assets, but can't prove that they own them, and therefore don't have access to mortgages and simply can't monetize that value. How do we get there? These are big challenges, but there's something really profound about the value of an immutable ledger that allows people to prove who they are, what they've done, and what they own, And these old legacy systems simply don't allow that in the sort of safest way.
And we've seen great applications of blockchain improving the provenance of things like diamonds and sustainable food and in supply chains and things like that, which I think have been quite eye-opening and a really valid and relevant use case. But I'm going to, so Halsey, you've been phenomenally successful with your business choices in the past, to put it mildly. If you had a mental checklist that you needed to go through to be able to say, I'm going to ask these 3 questions, 5 questions, and if the answer to them is X, then yes, it would be the right answer might be apply a blockchain as the solution. But if any one of these fails, then actually that's bollocks. Don't use a blockchain for it because you're asking the wrong question. Do you have some sort of a framework that is a BS filter at the moment when you're looking at all of these hyped blockchain solutions that are coming forward? Do you take a look at something and go, nah, that should never have been on the blockchain? You know, what's your secret?
Well, I don't have any particular secret in this area, but I do actually have a thought. I just want to say one thing to your point, because having built a financial institution, we've weaponized the financial system, and in some ways that's good because we're
Stephen Sprague over
because
there
we're
gave me that phrase once.
We're using it against Iran and North Korea in very effective ways, but it has profound implications for what we can really do with inclusion. Yeah. So I can come at this metaphorically. Having been part of the whole sort of dot-com area of the 90s, every company was effectively a part of AOL. AOL was essentially the prototype for everything that effectively became successful. So I was the computing area of AOL. And then Yahoo literally, it's the biggest company of all, literally recreated AOL on the web. You had like places like MarketWatch and you had ESPN doing sports. You had some of the most valuable companies were like the instant messaging companies. You had the mail providers. So people kind of looked at AOL, and you could kind of go through a checklist. You know, search was really searching. You know, AOL had search too. So a lot of the things, so the big problem with this is it's sort of everything in time, right? I mean, any one of these ideas in 10 years or 20 years or whatever, you know, they'll be, so the hard part is, well, which are now, right? And then that's not always obvious, but I think that the simplest way to sort of look at it is sort of, what do we know today, right? And then how do we apply those lessons? Because those are much easier than trying to come up with something that's, I mean, people have been trying to solve this issue. I tried to solve this issue of financial inclusion. I mean, that's why I got into this industry and started Uphold. But when you have a weaponized financial system, you have to look at what's really possible in the constraints that exist today and are legislative, you know, and legal. So it's always sort of what, when, and I think that the sort of more far out it seems to you, like the more complex, like you don't understand how it's going to work, you know, it's their words that sort of, you know, obfuscate it, but you don't actually understand what the mechanisms are, like what specifically does the blockchain do and what problem does it solve. You know, those things may happen, they're just not going to happen in the time frames in which people are buying coins and or tokens and expecting those things to happen.
We're having a conversation earlier on, Michael and I, in terms of blockchain is a technology for the future that you can't apply to current or past thinking because it enables you to think completely differently. And we were having a conversation, Scott, about regulation. Energy, really heavily regulated industry. And you see some opportunities for possibly removing a bit of the burden of compliance. And you've been doing some stuff with the regulator. You want to give us a brief couple of minutes just on that, or a couple of seconds even, as we coming up for a close?
So we've been sort of going around the world and talking with different regulators. And you know, it doesn't matter where in the energy space you are, everyone's going to agree with this idea that they want to move towards a more market-based system. They want to have more competition. They want to have more innovation. The energy space is not known for innovation at all. So they really do see this idea of anyone being able to transact with anyone as a really valid one. Now, energy regulators, they do not care about blockchain. Most of them haven't even heard of it. And when we go to talk to them about it, they say, just tell us what the roles and responsibilities are of each individual, and we really don't care about the back end. Whatever black box it is that you're using to facilitate all this, that's all good and well. Their focus is on consumer protections, on price protections, and on ensuring, to some degree that we have stable utilities, because none of us want blackouts because, some disruptor came in and totally got rid of your distribution utility. So the conversation with them really focuses on this idea of what are the benefits of blockchain, and once you start explaining that, then all of a sudden it's like that black box, they want to start hearing more about it. They want to say, oh, well, you're saying that within these energy transactions, I can actually see them in real time. All energy regulators, they know about Enron, and one of the big problems they had there was basically Enron was running really expensive jet engines when they had cheaper plants available for electricity generation. Well, if we were putting the device state, the availability of each of those plants on the blockchain and exposing that to a regulator in real time, then they would have caught that immediately. It wouldn't have been years later when all of a sudden the effects had already occurred. So I think the regulators are actually really excited by a lot of this stuff in the energy space, even though they do not need to really know the blockchain itself.
And Tabitha, closing thoughts, because again, we had a regulation conversation around financial services. Are you in agreement in terms of blockchain could be something that could help out?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the 2 billion people that don't have bank accounts, does anybody really need a bank account? And when we put everything into a blockchain, what's the role of a bank other than to hold my money and now effectively act as a money transmission device? Well, I don't need that. I can be paid, if I'm an employee, I can be paid by Michael. Michael can put my money on the blockchain and I can distribute it to somebody else. As far as regulatory oversight goes, well, that's fine. We can have smart contracts sitting on top of that blockchain that we're opting into, and we immediately bypass the need for about 80% of what the banking industry is actually doing today and the financial services regulatory infrastructure on top of it. We spent so much time and money and energy trying to protect people from fraud and from bank overstep that at this point, that's really why it's becoming so expensive. So what really is the role for the banking industry in a blockchain world? I think there's a really big question mark there, and there's a tremendous opportunity if we want to take advantage of it.
Fantastic. And we're out of time. We're going to stop there. If anybody wants to help me build a blockchain BS filter, then come and speak to me afterwards. Please give my panel a round of applause. Thank you very much for your insights.